you did it. You made it to number one. Tristan Cherry is the most relevant player in AFL Fantasy Supercoach and Dream Team for the 2025 preseason. But why is he here? That's the big question we will unpack throughout this episode, because he's one of the biggest decisions you have to make heading into round one and the first lockout of the season. Joining me on this episode is the first time we've ever had a guest. An outsider feels too harsh of a term, because this man has certainly become a beloved friend of not just the coaches panel, of the fantasy footy community at large over the last couple of years. And simply it was this, is when we were building into the 50 most relevant, our Patreons demanded, they said, MJ, we don't know when Tristan Cherry gets into the 50, but when he does, for goodness sake, could you please knock on the door of the Dr. Supercoach team, request one more go with Pig Mentality, because he understands the ruck dynamic better than anyone. And given that he's now landed at the number one spot, it seems fitting to welcome back to the coaches panel, Pig Mentality. Hello, mate. Nice to see you. And you've been put in this spot by the demand of the Patreon.
To be number one, top of the table with Tristan Cherry. And also a big thank you to your Patreons. It's always nice to hear a shout out and especially be requested to talk about a certain player. And I don't think we're going to let them down, because this is a really, really exciting episode. I've done some research and I messaged you the other day and I was like, oh, this is going to be a good one. So, I mean, Tristan Xerri, he broke out. He became a premium ruckman in all formats last year, and not just a premium ruckman, like one of the best players in both fantasy and Supercoach. He did it through a variety of scoring facets, like he marked, he tackled, got hit outs, disposals, clearances, contested possessions. He did it all. So really looking forward to this chat.
He was unbelievable for us last year. 0.1 away from hitting that magical 120 marker for us in Supercoach. He is over 640K for you in that format, while in AFL Fantasy, over 114 seasonal average, $1.1 million plus across those two formats. Did not miss a trick for us last year or a game, and his seasonal high scores should come as no surprise with that breakout season. They are his career high scores. A 185 in Supercoach against the West Coast Eagles is the season and career high score, while in AFL Fantasy, the same game, he absolutely blitzed the Eagles, a 168. Pig, you breeze through some of those statistical elements super quickly and easily for us, but this dynamic element of just how he scored in so many different core areas that historically a ruckman doesn't get to. I know we will pull these threads as we go through the podcast, but third in the league for tackles, sixth for stoppage clearances, ninth for contested possessions. Historically and traditionally, when we think about a ruckman and where they score, hit-outs is understandably the space and the place that we expect that to become. But he's a real different ruck beast. We've got used to the Englishes, the Grundys, just being the additional midfielder around the ground. But Cherry's scoring in a very different way to some of the more historical premium rucks we've had.
Yeah, he definitely is. And we'll go through a bit later and talk about his hit-out work. But one of the most glaring stats that you kind of mentioned is his tackles. And, you know, last year, Tristan Cherry averaged 7.5 tackles a game. That is a huge number that only a few players hit per season. Like, that's off the charts. I look back over the last 10 years of data, and I've actually found there are only been four occasions when a player was able to average 7.5 tackles per game 2 years in a row. So Andrew Swallow did it in 2015, 2016. Matt Prittis did it the next year, 2016, 2017. Then there was a big gap. No one could replicate that. Then Rory Laird in 2022, 2023, he did it. Then Matt Rowell last year backed it up at 7.5 tackles 2 years in a row. So that kind of indicates to me that, you know, maintaining 7.5 tackles is insane and probably not going to happen. It's only 4 years. Only four players have done it over the last 10 years. We think about even Jack Steele and Touk Miller's great tackle runs, you know, the early 2020s. Those two we thought were the best tacklers in the game. I mean, they didn't do it. They never had back-to-back 7.5 seasons. So I think it's unlikely that Tristan Cherry can keep up his insane tackle numbers of last year. But having said that, my analysis did find that the best tacklers, they kept making repeat entries in the top 5 of the yearly ranking. So maybe they didn't hit the 7.5. But Jack Steele, he hit like a 7.2, 7.3, 7, 7, things like that. So a good tackler one year absolutely can be a good tackler the following year, no doubt. So it's 7.5 is probably unsustainable for nearly everyone. Who knows, maybe Matt Rowell will do it a third year in a row. But even if Cherry's tackles dropped off a bit to say 6 or 7, that's still a really high number. And it still gives him a really good floor to build on. So I guess I'm just pointing out that people shouldn't expect him to go 7.5 again. I think that's actually quite unrealistic. He might drop down to 6 or something, which is still a high number. Still gives him a really good floor, but it's probably capping, that big stretch of 150s he went on at the end. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think the positive for coaches trying to look for outlet of, okay, he's going to lose those handful of points per game with a decrease of a tackle, is they start looking for, where can he replicate that in other positions? Well, he's not even averaging 3 marks per game. Mid-30s pure hitouts, let alone the hitouts to advantage, is far from an astronomically large number. He's averaging under 20 disposals per game. And so there are pathways here that, while the tackling feels difficult to replicate, coaches can feel some level of coverage of the diminishing there with maybe natural progression, given it's his first full season in this ruck role. Last year, to quickly remind us of his brilliance, 17 tons last year in AFL fantasy, 11 of them over 120, including a 150, a 156, and a 168. To go with that, just undeniably huge ceiling scoring is he just rarely lets you down. Just the one score under 80 last year in AFL fantasy. He's second by points and average last year across all players and all lines, while in SuperCoach, even better from a pure numbers perspective. 19 tons from 23 games is unheard of for a player of the price point we were expecting him to be for us last year. 9 of those tons were over 120. Here's your captaincy markers. And then, bang, 6 over 140, including that 185 as the career high score. And importantly, just the one sub score under 90 all season. 3rd for total points, 4th for averages. We will start to unpack these season in more detail in a moment, but Pig, he was probably the most relevant player for us last year, given what he's delivered in retrospect. And I'm putting him on the agenda to be again for 2025.
Well, as he should be. He was one of the surprise packets, I'm sure. Like, people expected him to be good, and a lot of people did pick him to make money, but I don't know how many genuinely thought he would be one of the best ruckmen in the league. I think people thought maybe he'd be a stepping stone, but he just went on that run and went crazy. And as you know, like, one of the niches I feel for the SuperCoach community is captaincy recommendations. And those last 5 rounds, he made me irrelevant and just said, just put it on Cherry. He's just on this heater, and he's got some of the easiest matchups. He's just going crazy. So it's the same for AFL fantasy. I mean, just pick Cherry. So I can see why people are leaning that way this year. They think, yep, awesome, great, safe captaincy. And look, he deserves that. He was brilliant.
I want to talk about that run home shortly, but let's pull a little bit deeper through the thread around his score build. We've mentioned that tackles was such a significant amount, 3rd in the league, 7.5, and hitouts, again, for a ruckman, is historically where they build their score. But these two powers combined do something pretty impressive for Tristan Cherry. And so as we turn the corner and start to make the decisions about whether or not we select him in 2025, what are these two scoring columns of Cherry hold for us? Are they sustainable into a new season? And what's some of the analysis you've done for us in these two arenas of his scoring?
Well, we often do see that a lot of the good ruckmen do both tackle and hitouts, like you said. I think Rowan Marshall is one of the best ruck tacklers, but he's not that great at hitouts. Gorn, I think Nank is someone else that comes to mind that can do a bit of both. I think we've already talked about the tackles. Obviously, Cherry's one of the best tacklers in the game, and I think he could still be in that top 5 or top 10 tacklers in the game. I said it's probably going to come back from 7.5, but everyone comes back from 7.5. So if we look at hitouts, I think people view Tristan Cherry as a very good hit-out ruckman, and he's not necessarily someone that wins the tap a lot. He goes at about a 43% hit-out win rate. So that's like literally right in the middle. That's smack bang average. So it's not bad. It's certainly not Witts or O'Brien good. They're kind of the best. They're going at like 50%. But it's not the Bailey Williams or even Timmy English is in the 30s kind of percent. So it's just in the middle. But that's also, and his hit outs to advantage percentage, that was actually pretty average. And it doesn't really matter in fantasy. You just get 1 point per hit out. But for SuperCoach, it's about 5 points if your hit out goes to a teammate. And so he was actually below average in that. But I think that could be influenced by the fact that North Melbourne's midfield got beat a lot last year. So if North midfield improve, I could see his hit outs to advantage numbers may improve as well. But as you know, MJ, I believe that an analysis of a team's fixture is the most important factor in predicting a ruckman scoring, especially. Other positions it still works, but it's a bit less predictable. But in the ruckman, it's literally a 1v1 for 90% of the game. So if you're facing a Jared Witts, it's very different to a proposition if you're facing a Sam DeConey. So especially in terms of the hit-out battle. So let's say player X, I've just made someone up, averages 20 disposals, 5 marks, 5 tackles per game. Like that's a great stat line. Those factors generally are fairly consistent game to game for the ruckman. Like if you're playing Witts or Sam DeConey, it doesn't fluctuate that much, and that's kind of a nice base for them. But hit-outs are what really do fluctuate for the ruckman game to game based on who they're playing. And that's where the ruckman often get their spike scores from. So when I do my captaincy research, I'm taking this into really, really big consideration. So especially in SuperCoach, where a hit-out advantage, as I said, is worth about 5 points. And I did have a lot of success using this work with the matchup data for ruckman. So Cherry's no particular exception to this rule. And I just picked 2 random rounds last year where he played. I tried to find somewhere where he played a hard matchup, then he played an easy matchup in terms of winning the hit out. And it was round 15. He went head-to-head with Max Gawn. Max is one of the best tap ruckmen in the league. He limited Cherry to 20 hit-outs. Cherry scored 111 SuperCoach, 99 fantasy. Still a solid score, but like I said, that's his base. But a week later, he had a similar amount of disposals, and the combined marks and tackles was similar as well. But because he matched up with Tim English, he got his hands on 34 hit-outs, so an extra 14 hit-outs a game. He scored a big 141 in SuperCoach and 129 in fantasy. So that's where I'm kind of saying I do think the fixture analysis is really important for ruckman in particular. I think it just it gives them access to free points, and that's where the 110s can turn into 140s. So in my mind, the biggest thing to Tristan Cherry's huge run post-bye last year was the fixture. And I actually did a fixture analysis in the preseason of 2024, so this time last year. Remember, I looked at Gawn, Grundy, English, Marshall, Cherry, and I noted on a few podcasts that Cherry had a fairly hard run up to his bye, and then it got very, very easy for the final 12 rounds. So I kind of identified that before the season, but I myself didn't take advantage. I just set and forget English and Gawn, and that was a mistake. But anyway, so what did we see for Cherry last year? He had 108 average this is SuperCoach, 108 average pre-buy, and then 131 average post-buy in SuperCoach when he got that really easy fixture against these really easy ruckmen. And if we look at his last 5 games, it's an insane 5-round average of 149 SuperCoach and 141 fantasy. So that's just incredible. And if we look at his opponents in that time, he came up against Lloyd Meek. That's an easy matchup to win the hit out again. Rory Lobb. So Tim English didn't even play. He got the Rory Lobb matchup. He then got Bailey Williams. He then got Toby Nankervis, who's easy to score against. And he got Mark Blitzarves. So it wasn't even Reece Stanley, it was Blitzarves. So he's coming up against these backup ruckmen a lot as well. That could be arguably 5 of the easiest ruck matchups in the league. So I probably would have expected any premium ruckman worth their salt to absolutely destroy that run of games. I probably don't think anyone could have done a 149 average in SuperCoach. That's pretty unique. But I think we do need to take stock that the fixture played a really important part of Cherry's scoring run last year.
Yeah, well, looking at those final 5 games, just the pure hit out and tackle numbers, that Geelong game, 54 hit outs and 8 tackles,
That's insane.
45 hit outs against Richmond, 10 tackles. Then against West Coast, 33 hitouts, 12 tackles. The Bulldogs game, 44 hitouts and 6 tackles. And then that final game of the year against the Hawks, 35 hitouts and 3 tackles. Like, unbelievable. It's the perfect stars-aligned combination, isn't it? Of fixture is great, then getting second-tier ruckman being great, and he also then just has that confidence in himself and in his body. All those elements kind of start to land beautifully in alignment for us through there. And so thinking about that pre and post-buy split, the price point we are paying for him, if we get the post-buy scoring, unbelievable expense, but unbelievable output. And good luck catching him. If he starts 2025 the way he ends 2024, good night. We are talking $1.3 million in fantasy and well north of $700K in SuperCoach. What an amazing selection. However, if you pay that near 120 in fantasy or in SuperCoach and 115 in fantasy, and you get that pre-buy scoring, which by the way is still good, that could be the most catastrophic selection you make for the year, because you're overpaying now, quote unquote, 15 points per game upon return. And that is season crushing and structural defining. And if you start slow and it's only a 105, I say in jest, you find it really hard to justify trading out of that when you've got some other spot fives likely hitting cash cows and breakout options through there. So talk me through the case. Maybe that's the question I should ask you. Is what he did last year only just unsustainable because he had all the stars aligning, or is this a new normative that statistically we can have some hope for?
I think it could be somewhere in the middle. I definitely don't think the post-buy run is sustainable. No one goes at a 131 SuperCoach for an entire season. Bont very nearly did, but English nearly did, but it's pretty unsustainable. So I think there's definitely regression from that. But in terms of like his season-long average, he potentially could do that again. There is still some upside with him. He's so young. He's like, as we said, last year was his first full season as solo ruck. He now has another preseason solo ruck. We're hoping North's midfield get a bit better with LDU and Sheasel becoming a year older. Wardlaw, unfortunately, is injured at the minute, but there's hope that North will be a bit better. And we saw with Gawn last year, I actually reckon a few of his struggles were Melbourne's midfield struggling rather than him struggling. So Cherry, this could be the same thing. If North's midfield get better, I could see him getting better, especially, like I said, those hit-outs to advantage in SuperCoach. Maybe they could actually find a teammate if the teammates are better. So there certainly is upside. And you raised one as well about the marks. Only 3 marks a game is quite low. We normally see a lot of the premiums kind of get around 5 marks a game. So there's still a bit of a potential boost there. But it's probably somewhere in the middle. And we can talk about the fixture for this year in a minute, but I'm not necessarily that keen straight up off the bat either. So it might be a similar thing where, if, like you said, if he does struggle out of the gate and only does a 105, it's kind of like the Tim English of last year in a way, where you're paying top dollar for someone and they're giving you below par scores, and that ruins your season so much more than, I don't know, someone like a Jaden Short or a Matt Roberts price just plateauing. If they just hold their price, it's not that big a deal. It's annoying, but it's not great. But if a ruckman or a premium loses 100, 150K, that's a killer.
Yeah, it's so true. Last year he has an AFL fantasy market share for North Melbourne of 7.7. It's he and Sheasel are the only ones over 7. Anything over 7 is a good share of the ball. But last year he had 5 games where he was over 9% market share, which is absolutely incredible. To have that, there were just 16 players last year using AFL fantasy data that had a 9% market share in a game on more than one occasion. Tristan Cherry had 5. The only other 2 to have more than 3 was Max Gawn and Andrew Brayshaw. They both have 4. Then there is 3 guys that get into a market share of 3 games or more over 9, and that is Marshall, that is Sheasel, that is Newman. Then you've just got sort of like 8 or 9 guys to get it twice, and that's it. So this is a guy that you're hoping in how do you build this narrative and pathway to scoring hold or scoring that's holding towards the end of last year. These are the sort of things you're going to be looking for, because you're like, all right, if tackles are hard to replicate, hit out to advantage might get him there a little bit. He's already got a high team market share already. And we are seeing in AFL fantasy a decrease year on year of points overall. We know SuperCoach is going to hold to that pure number that ultimately balances things out. So you're starting to find these threads where you're like, oh, starting him is hard. Starting him with that fixture that I know you'll unpack for us in a moment feels hard. That unsustainability to the end of last year isn't impossible, but it's on the more difficult side than the ease of side. But then we look at the rucks, Pig, and I can see why 55% of the AFL fantasy and SuperCoach community have picked him, because the value rucks we thought we might have feel like they've dried up a little bit. While Matt Flynn's still a potential outcome, as the preseason's gone on, seemingly Bailey Williams has more and more established himself in that position. Rowan Marshall has got himself injured, so it's impacted our structures. Max Gawn in SuperCoach is the most expensive ruck, and while the fixture looks great, it does start to hurt our mind a little bit that that's the way to go. Tim English, I know some are keen on, but where do you expect him to get back to that career high narrative? Tom De Koning feels like the only one that universally the community are saying, yes, I'll go with. And so as we start running up and down our ruck lines, looking for value and not really finding much options we like, we start to then defer to I'll just pick someone that I think can be a captain, that I think will be close enough. And I think that Tim English contrast you made for us feels very fitting. Are we picking ourselves here with such high ownership, just the Tim English of 2025? And if we are, this high ownership becomes very season defining.
Yeah, for sure. It could be. I don't want to necessarily say he's going to be the Tim English of this year, because he has so many ways to score that he still could do well. And I can understand people, like you said, those rucks are all falling over themselves and ruling themselves out, especially like people were keen on Sean Darcy, Matt Flynn. Yeah. They've ruled themselves out essentially. Rowan Marshall probably with the injury. Even Tom De Koning could get Mark Pitnet in round 1, and then he's a dead pick. So I definitely see why people are doing it. I think people just probably need to. I think people are selecting it because they believe he's a really great captain option, and if that's your justification, I can see the argument behind that, and that's fair. I think people should just look at his early fixture and actually ask themselves if they do think he's got good matchups. And so I'll run through it in a minute.
Yeah, please.
But there are some other options people could consider in the ruck line, like if you do some research and you could see Cherry coming down 80k, for example, there are guys like Jordan Sweet that I actually think have a little bit of upside that could go up 80k. Yes, he's only making 80k, so in SuperCoach he's not doing the 150k that people used to want. But I think that's a little bit outdated now with the extra trades 150k. I think if someone like Sweet goes up 80k, Cherry goes down 80k, that's actually 160k you've made. Obviously, it costs a trade to pivot to them, but things like that are things I think people should consider. I mean, in Dr. SuperCoach Slack, there's been a bit of chat around Darcy Cameron and Kieran Briggs potentially filling that role as well. I mean, annoyingly, they have that early buy, but I think Briggs in particular is really good value, and he could be someone that makes you quite a bit of money and then could be a pivot. But that's kind of where I land on that. But I did promise to go through the 2025 fixture with you, because I think it is fascinating. And I just want to make a note that obviously we're using 2024 data because that's all we have. There's no games played yet in 2025. But from my observations over the years, ruckman difficulty rarely changes year to year. I still expect Witts and Riley O'Brien to win the most hit-outs. I still expect the De Koning brothers to be pushovers in the hit-out battle. But There are some teams where you could argue, like for instance, Essendon were actually the hardest team in the last 10 rounds because they ran that Goldstein-Draper combo. I don't think they're going to do that. The chat out of Essendon is that it's going to be Nick Bryan getting a good run and then Draper. So, when teams change rucks, and West Coast is another example. If Flynn is main ruck, he's a lot more difficult than Bailey Williams. So there's a few things to keep in mind, but most of the premium set rucks, I think their difficulty will stay the same. So my 2025 fixture analysis essentially shows the exact same trend as on the cards as last year. North Melbourne have one of the hardest runs for ruck pre-buy in 2025 and one of the easiest post-buy. So that leads me to believe that Cherry will struggle to maintain his lofty starting price. He could drop 100 to 150k depending on the format over the first couple of months and be able to pick up much cheaper after his buy to take advantage of the easy run home. He also has that first mid-season buy. So if you have a ruckman like Flynn or Briggs or Meek sitting there as a placeholder that plays a bit has the buy after him, you can trade them to Cherry on their buy, maximize the games played in that slot. So I've kind of just briefly breezed over that I think he has a really hard run to start and then a really easy one to finish the year. People go, but round one, English captaincy against him, English. Yeah, absolutely. Round one, captain him for sure. But if you look at his round 1 to round 11, there aren't actually that many easy matchups. He plays a lot of the really hard teams. So in just eyeballing his round 1 to round 11, he gets Tim English. He gets Toby Nankervis. That should be a good score. He might get Tom De Koning. Depends if it's De Koning and Pitternet or just De Koning. And then he probably gets whoever Essendon roll out. So if it's Goldstein, it's hard. If it's Nick Bryan, it's English. If it's Nick Bryan, it's easy. They're actually the only 4 games that I would consider easy in the first 11. The rest are actually really difficult. So I do see a world where Cherry averages 115 to 120 over the season. But I actually think it might be like 105 pre-buy split and 125 post-buy split if I had to make a prediction. So that's where I'm at, and he hasn't been in my team all preseason, and I don't think he will be, just because of that really hard fixture. And to do that, I looked at the DFS data, and you can look at their season-long DFS, but then I converted it into raw numbers and was able to rank, essentially, like who has the easiest, who has the hardest run. There were teams like Freo and St Kilda and actually Tom De Koning at Carlton that have the easiest run. Their runs are beautiful to start. And then there are guys like Tristan Cherry that really have a really hard run. So that's where I'm sitting with him at the moment. He's so good that he could come out and still give you 120s against Matt Swan and Jared Witts and guys like that. But when we look at data to try and analyse that, it's not something I'd necessarily bet on him doing.
Yeah. So why is Tristan Cherry at number 1 in my 50 most relevant? Well, for almost the exact elements that Pig has unpacked for us is we look at a line and we look at a player that ultimately the decision on this one player defines the rest of your starting structure. With him at R1, well, it changes not only what the rest of your ruck line looks like, but ultimately just the amount of cash you've now got to inject into your other starting squad selections. He, of all players, becomes the most defining selection that impacts your structure. Alongside, over half the competition right now own him. If you start him and he goes slow and does a Tim English or elements of what Pig's projected based on last year's fixture analysis being, is that he almost replicates his last year form of low hundreds to start the year, dynamite 120 finish after the bye. If you pay for that, this is the greatest handbrake, not just on your cash generation, but on your scoring, given what you are paying for to be one of, if not the best scorers in the game. Whereas if you fade against a 55% ownership and he comes out strong, good luck catching him. Going unique is important and critical sometimes in your starting squad, but going against a guy with the scoring pedigree of Cherry, with such high ownership and not just culturally slow in just the casual coach, but in the high-end coach too, because of the dilemma we've unpacked of these guys keep falling over. I'm just going to anchor my team with a guy that I feel confident will be there. And if he's off the pace a little bit, I don't think it will be too far. Going against that feels scary, but going with that feels challenging. It literally, to me, feels like the greatest decision you have to make this preseason about any one specific player, because how he starts the year, how your structure goes, I think a lot of those pathways lend itself back to Tristan Cherry. So you can disagree or agree, and that's the beauty of the 50 Most Relevant. This series has all been about and always been about starting a conversation, providing countering perspectives, both the positive and the negative, giving you the elements and the ingredients you need to ultimately make an informed decision about what's right for you, the format you play, and the way you like to build your fantasy football side. We give you all that and then go make those decisions. To me, the decision about Tristan Cherry for some is agonizing about whether they start or fade. For others, it feels easy to start or to fade. But what are you doing with him in Classic is a big decision to make. But on draft day, Pig, only one person gets that decision. It all probably comes down to where he goes on draft day. I think he's a first rounder. That's probably a locked in, but league size, on-field scoring numbers, these kind of variables determine whether or not he's super early in the first round or not. Where do you think he'll go on draft day?
I fully agree with you that he's a first-round pick, 100%. Even with this slower start that I'm potentially projecting, doesn't matter. He's still a first-round pick over the course of the season. There'll be people that take him pick one. There'll be people that are super hot on him, think he can replicate what he did at the back end of last year. You know, the positional scarcity where you think you can get heaps of mids later, so maybe you lock in a premium ruck. There'll definitely be people that take him pick one. I think he's pretty consensus as a top 5 pick, probably across the formats. I personally think I would take Max Gawn over him, but I'm not certain. Oh, this is in SuperCoach, sorry.
Yep.
But there's also the age and injury worry potentially with Gawn. I had a pick one in a mock draft for SuperCoach just the other day, and I took Bont because I think he's, quite a bit of an average above those two. But, I wouldn't have been shocked if anyone takes Cherry at 1 and definitely in the top 5.
Yeah, we've just completed a coaches panel mock draft on the Keeper platform, and the commissioner himself, the creator of Keeper, Ryan, had no qualms with taking Cherry at pick 1. Now, 12 teams, 5, 6, 1, 5 in a flex/utility probably aids itself more to more coaches and the more outcomes of rucks on field, a player like a Cherry or a Gawn or others going early. So look, I'm with you. If you're a pick in the latter half of the first round, just take Cherry off your queue. He's just not going to make it to that point in time because he's one of, if not the first ruck taken across the board on all of our drafting platforms. Hey, Pig, you've been an absolute superstar this preseason, not just for us here at the Coaches Panel, doing multiple episodes now, but also your preseason strategy conversations are flowing out. What else have you got lined up for us from the Dr. Supercoach community and yourself this preseason? Because we are getting close to not only the games, but ultimately round 1.
Yeah, no, there's plenty going on. As people have probably been seeing, the Dr. Supercoach YouTube's flowing at the moment. I've got 2 episodes a week coming out where I'm interviewing some of my favourite coaches in the Supercoach community about strategy and tactics, and going through a bunch of players as well. So those that haven't been following that yet, head over to Dr. Supercoach on YouTube, and we're calling it Pig's Pen. So I'm getting a bunch of content creators in to chat with them. I think at this stage there's probably 5 or 6 been released. I'm doing 10 in total. So, I mean, it's awesome. There's been some great discussions with guys like Mini Monk from the Coaches Panel talking about what you can learn from AFL fantasy. I had Selby on, DR, Jaden Poposky. There's heaps of very knowledgeable coaches that are giving some really great insights, and there's been a lot of awesome feedback on that. People are loving that series. So head over to Dr. Supercoach YouTube and find that. You can also find me on Twitter at pig_DRSC. There's the main Dr. Supercoach channel there as well. Pig, and then there's Pistol, Cheezo, and JB are on Twitter as well. In terms of other stuff, there's plenty going on in the Dr. Supercoach Patreon community. So head over to patreon.com and find Dr. Supercoach. You can join up there. I think $6 a month gets you access to our Slack community, which is just an awesome, 600 people that love talking Supercoach. It's going off at the moment. There's so much chat. Everyone's working out their sides. I had a couple of meetings at work yesterday, and I looked on at lunchtime, and there's 330 unread messages arguing about whether we should start Jaden Short or not.
Oh, wow.
So, you get a very in-depth analysis from very passionate Supercoach players about every single player. And you could just pop in a name and then boom, everyone's having their opinion on it, which is great. You get to find out what a general vibe of it is. So that's what's going on, Dr. Supercoach Patreon. I'd recommend anyone join that. It's just a great community as well. Like, we have a catch up mid-year every year as well. We find a pub in Melbourne and put on some pizzas and some beer. So if you think about your $6 a month, then that kind of, you'll probably get that back in pizzas and beer.
Yeah, probably true. Hey, mate, an absolute pleasure to have you as one of many guests on this year's 50 Most Relevant. We've put all those links in the detail of this description in the episode. So you can go grab that, the podcast, the Patreon, the YouTube channel, all those social media places that Pig has mentioned. We've put them in the description of this episode for you to go and check out. While you're also in there, the details to get in touch with us across social media, join the Coaches Panel Patreon, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch and more. Can also be found in the description of this episode. Well, you did it, friend. You made it through my 2025 50 Most Relevant. So many incredible people to thank from across the AFL Fantasy, Supercoach, and the Keeper Draft community. I dare not go through them all by name because I will take this podcast deep into the near hour territory. But every single person that joined me on this series, I am incredibly grateful for your support, your collaboration, and your encouragement right throughout this series. If you're just catching up on the 50 Most Relevant, the good news is you get to go back in time and relive it. You know, that time where you got to tell a friend about like The Office or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, that TV show you loved, and you're like, oh, you get to discover this for the first time and I get to watch it. That's exactly what it's like when you tell a friend that hasn't discovered the 50 Most Relevant yet. Go back in time, re-listen to those players as you see them pop up through preseason now with community series, practice games, last few internal trials. It's like, oh, I want to unpack that player more. We've recorded and done these in such a way that you can go back and relive the deep dive on a player to help you reposition your ideas and your thoughts around a player. So if there are players that are on the top 50 that you're like, oh, I'm still not certain about that, go back, rewatch it, re-listen to it, because I still think it's going to be of great use to you. So what's next from the Coaches Panel? A ton of stuff. Still, daily content is going to be dropping to you on this channel, whether it be you're watching this on YouTube, hi, if you are, or if you're listening to it as an audio podcast. A daily episode still dropping every single day, including 10 players that were unlucky to miss the 50 Most Relevant. It's probably, I could do another 50, but I've narrowed that down to 10. I've identified 16 potential dual position changes that I think are going to come into the game in the first DPP allocation. We've got that. There are some draft sleepers, my tiers of drafts. I'm going to reveal the top tier of my draft for Keeper platform. And so we've got a ton of stuff rolling out. So you definitely don't want to check out the Coaches Panel. We have got a ton of stuff rolling through for you for the rest of the preseason. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in on this year's 50 Most Relevant. We couldn't have done it without you watching and listening and getting involved in the conversation. We'll be back with you again tomorrow, talking all things fantasy footy.